Welcome to Theological Table Talk, the podcast of the Center for Christian Studies. Glad that you've joined us for this episode. I'm joined, as usual, by Todd Hall, who's the Associate Director of the Center for Christian Studies. Todd, how's it going?
Going all right. Hey, everybody. Good to see everybody or not see everybody, whatever it is.
Yeah, they're there looking at you. You ever feel like you're being looked at, stared at?
I mean, all
Uh,
the time.
that's what's happening here. So today we are going to be talking about a couple of aspects of singing in churches. And joining us for our conversation today is John Wiegand, who is a lawyer who lives in California. I'll talk a little more about his um, uh, hymnal here in a moment. But John, welcome and thank you for joining us today.
Glad to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, absolutely. So, as I mentioned, we're going to talk about singing in churches. My introduction to John, actually, well before I knew him, was from a hymnal that you edited that's called Praise for the Lord. And I would say that this is probably still to this day, it certainly was when I saw it 25 or 30 years ago, is my favorite hymnal in Churches of Christ. I grew up with Songs of the Church hymnal, and I knew every number to every song, at least every song that we sang. This is the one that was famous, and people in Churches of Christ will know this. It had 728B as the entry for what I call the Church of Christ anthem. This book, Praise for the Lord, was sort of like that book on steroids. So it took all of those, I think all of those songs. You can correct anything I say here in just a moment. But for all I know, took all of those songs and then added, I don't know, over 200 more songs in there, or nearly 200, I should say, and including at the end what were at the time more current contemporary songs, what we used to call devotional songs, and kind of before the praise and worship genre went uh, viral in Churches of Christ. But some very good ones, that have, I think, staying power, which is a test of a good song. I mean, I'm just looking in the back there. Steadfast love of the Lord, unto thee, O Lord. Just some really great, Seek Ye First, a lot of scripturally based songs. Jesus is Lord. All of those in the back, which of course were not in the older songs of the church. So I have my copy of this. It's stamped with the Saturn Road Church of Christ from Garland. I promise that I did not steal this book, but I think it's when Oklahoma Christian Chorale was going through on tour, and I was a part of that, probably in 1997 or 98. We did a stop there, did a couple of numbers for them on Sunday morning, one of which I remember not going well. And they had these books. I think it was that trip. They had these books like in the back, and they were giving them out. Maybe replacing them with the Songs of Faith and Praise, which I've seen is also became kind of ubiquitous in Churches of Christ. But that book um, did not keep a lot of the songs that were, I would say, kept in this. So a lot of the invitation songs, a lot of the songs about heaven, a lot of the Tillet S. Tedley songs, which I was always partial to. I think the songs of faith and praise kept "Worthy Art Thou," and that was it. So just thank you, John, for your work on this book. This one is copyrighted in 1992, and it says fourth printing 93. So maybe if you could just tell us a little bit, I've talked enough here right now. Tell us a little bit about this hymnal, how you came to be in charge of editing this, and is it still in production, or when did that stop? If it did, just say a little bit about that, if you would.
Sure. Got started on this way back when I was in law school at the University of Illinois, and I was at a congregation where the students frustrated the campus minister to death because the campus minister thought that we wanted to sing devotional songs because we were in college. But the mix of students we had wanted to sing more predominantly classical hymns. So, of course, like everyone else in the 1980s, we had the aforementioned Songs of the Church with 728B, and we published a supplement to that book. Um, and it was originally designed for our own use, but we got all the copyright clearances and everything legal, and we took it to the printer, and the printer said, "Look, kids, um, this is a kind of nice project, but I'll tell you, I can print 3,000 of them for very little more than I'm going to charge you for printing 300." And we were students and kind of stood there, and we had one of the elders from the congregation with us, and he said, "Guys, I'll front you the money. We'll see if we can sell these to congregations around here in Central Illinois." So I said, "Go ahead. Here we go, printing 3,000 of them." So we sent copies to Gospel Advocate and then 20th Century Christian bookstores to see if they wanted to stock these supplements in their store. And both said yes, but then we got a second letter from Jim Bill McIntyre, who says, um, "Have you all considered doing a hymn book? My son Mark will be contacting you about this shortly." So then I get a call from Mark, and he says, "I understand from my dad you'll be doing a hymn book for us. When will it be ready?" So um, we moved forward with that, um, and it took a while because the industry was undergoing some change, and we were switching from music typewriters to typesetting books using software on PCs. We used Finale, which at that time was a new program. We said, "We need shape notes." They said, "What are shape notes?" So we had to bring in a guy, Richard Van Dyke, who was a minister, associate minister for a congregation in Franklin, Kentucky at the time, who wrote the code and worked with the people at Finale to introduce shape notes. It turns out that the arrangement that we had with Finale let them use the code that we had worked together. They claim the intellectual property rights to that code, and that's now incorporated into the Finale product and available commercially and
Hmm.
other subsequent books, both for use in Churches of Christ and in Mennonite and other a cappella churches that sing with shape notes, um, have that as part of Finale now. So we had that. We had the first edition came out in 1992, and the Saturn Road Church had a special edition printed with their church name on the front that you held up. And then in 1997, we came out with the expanded edition. They gave those away, and they bought a set of 1997 expanded edition books, which took us up to 990 hymns.
Yeah. Yeah.
Then
Very nice.
subsequently, we added an electronic edition, and that was a joint venture with a paperless hymnal and James Tackett.
Okay.
It's just
Who is still going
still
strong here in
going.
Austin?
So the electronic edition is interesting because there are a few copyright owners which will not license their songs to a purely electronic product. So there's a few songs that are not in the paperless hymnal
Oh,
because of the beliefs of the copyright owners that that was going to not be a good moneymaker for them. But we were able to get every hymn in our book onto the electronic edition because our electronic edition was attached to a print edition.
Um,
So every hymn that's in the printed book is in our electronic edition, including some that are not part of the paperless hymnal collection because of the opinions of the copyright owners.
Hmm.
do you know offhand what some of those songs are that we might know that don't get into paperless hymnal because of that?
Ooh, I know one that was the subject of litigation, not with us, but with other people,
Yeah.
which is "Sing of the Lord's Goodness." I don't know if I don't know if you use this one. It's in a minor key. It's a
Hmm.
very contemporary sounding song,
Hmm.
written in the late '80s, I believe, um, and uh, it's owned by OCP Publications, and OCP will not license to a purely electronic product.
Hmm.
Hmm.
There are a few more. I just can't think of them off
Yeah,
the
it's okay.
tip of my tongue here.
So, what was the last printing of this hymnal? This is the updated, you said,
Yeah,
happened in
the expanded
97.
edition was last printed um, about the time of the pandemic began,
Okay.
and we have sold out of that at the moment, and we're considering what to do next. As I think everybody knows, the economics of hymn books has changed drastically for several reasons. First of all, there's been a shift to projecting. Books don't wear out as fast if they're not being taken in and out of the pews.
Hmm.
Hmm.
And then I think we have some data points uh, by now that are showing that pandemics have not been good for churches. The pandemic has not been good for churches of Christ. We've come out of this significantly smaller than we went into it. And I
Hmm.
think the first issue of your journal dealt with some of the effects of the pandemic and how um, uh, trends that we in Churches of Christ appeared to be immune to prior to the pandemic. A lot of churches were shrinking before the pandemic, and we were seemingly holding our own. Those bad trends caught up to us in the pandemic. There's a shift to electronic. There's a smaller uh, base of potential customers, and then um, the yeah, I guess those are the two main
Yeah.
factors.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. For the economics, there is a third factor, and that is um, paper and printing costs have skyrocketed,
Hmm.
and that's in comparison. Just taking general inflation um, aside, the price of uh, paper, of the manufacturing process, and shipping costs have all skyrocketed higher than the rate of general inflation. So, hymn book economics have changed drastically
Hmm.
in the last 5 years, from the beginning of the pandemic to now.
Hmm.
Yeah. Uh, that's interesting. And your last printing up to this point is actually more recent than I thought it would be, 2020. Do you know of churches that are still not any churches of Christ that are not projecting their songs
So it's
and using
interesting.
hymnals only?
Yeah, so it's interesting. Like here in the San Francisco Bay Area, there are about 60 congregations, and that includes kind of all the different segments as we might think of them either theologically or demographically. So we have about 60 congregations, and only about 20 to 25 to 35% are projecting. A majority are not. Now,
Interesting.
if you I think the kind of the louder, more prominent voices in our brotherhood are with larger Bible Belt congregations, and they're all projecting, or almost virtually all of them are projecting. But when you get out into rural areas, even in the South, and you get into smaller churches and areas away from the Bible Belt, the penetration of PowerPoint in churches is spotty. And I talk with James Tackett, um, the editor of the Paperless Hymnal, and he confirms that it's less than half our churches are projecting. Now, they're the bigger churches that are projecting. So probably maybe 75% of our membership are in churches that are projecting.
Yeah. That's shocking to me and shows how um, even though I think I have some exposure to rural churches and churches outside of the Bible Belt, I'm not on a regular basis in those churches. And so I freely acknowledge that and am therefore shocked by that number. I would have put it at a lot higher percentage of churches of Christ. But I think you're right. Given that the majority of churches of Christ are under 100 members, this is in some ways a luxury of wealthier churches who have people that they can put onto preparing slides. They have the infrastructure of, the visible projector and the maintenance and all that goes with increasing electronic technology, audio and video capabilities, and all of that, so that even a lot of churches that I know of that I would say are in very small towns or rural that project songs on Sunday morning, they don't at Sunday night or Wednesday night or any other gathering. It's only on Sunday mornings. So I would guess that goes into that's part of the 50% or whatever who are projecting, or those who are only doing it once a week, even though they're meeting 3 or more times a week. Um, yeah, so I find that very interesting. It sort of undercuts in some ways the force of my next question, because my next question begins with the observation, which may not be correct, and that is that in let's say the year 2000, almost no churches of Christ were projecting songs. Okay. You're nodding your head, so that sounds that I take that as confirmation that sounds right.
Agreed.
By 2010, um, almost no congregations of churches of Christ that I know, okay, that I had direct interaction with in several different states, almost no churches of Christ um, weren't projecting. Almost all were. Okay, so let's just say almost all, I'll have to revise to 50%, nearly 50%, or the majority of churches in the Bible Belt. Okay.
Mhm.
A bunch of them were, so that it's hard for people I know to name a congregation that doesn't project. I'll just say the congregation where I preach does not project, but we are an outlier here in Texas. Um, so, what are the consequences? And I ask you, as someone who has a hand in producing the print and probably loves things about the print, but also had a hand in the electronic format as well. What are the consequences of I was going to say near ubiquitous, maybe not, but the transition from print only to projection only, from hymnals to slides? Let's talk about first maybe benefits. What are just some of these may be obvious, but with every technology, I like to say, what are the pros and what are the cons? We'll get to the cons in a second, but what are the pros for doing this?
Well, I guess that you would want to start with the fact that you have access to so much more material so much more quickly.
Okay.
Okay. Think about how long it it would take for new material to get into the repertoire of most congregations in the pre-projection age. We mentioned earlier, Our God, He is Alive, 728B in Songs of the Church. The song was written in 1966. It didn't make it into Songs of the Church in 1971 when the book first came out. It was added. That's why it was 728B.
I've always wondered this, by the way. So go ahead.
Okay, so here's the story. I wasn't involved, all right, but here's the story. You can get the 1971 and 1972 printings, and hymn 728 had a special chorus coda. Um, and in the 1973 edition, that extra chorus coda, which was on its own separate page, was removed in favor of 728B, Our God, He is Alive. So you think about the fact that that was already uh, seven, yeah, 7 years after the song was written,
Hmm.
and 7 years after it first started entering the repertoire of Churches of Christ. It made its first appearance in a hymn book 7 years later. And there was no other way to sing it. Then um, Ellis Crum, who was the editor of Sacred Selections, purchased the copyright. I think he did that in 1974. And he put that in the end page of his own hymn book, Sacred Selections, which published in Indiana. It had utilization primarily in the Midwest and among predominantly Black congregations. Okay, so it got out that the hymn got out through Sacred Selections, but it really wasn't until churches started buying their second set of songs of the church that it made it into most of our congregations. It wasn't highly popular until the late 70s,
Hmm.
which over 10 years after it was written.
Yeah.
So a lot more material, and that was a very special case, right? That Our Gandhi is Alive would be kind of, you would expect to be the extreme case of something catching on quickly, right? And it
Yeah.
took it took about 10 years. So if you look at kind of an average good new piece of music, say I Stand in Awe, which was written I think in 1987 and was starting to be popularized in our churches in the 1990s through hymn books. Compare that to how fast In Christ Alone was able to be introduced. Much quicker because uh, people can get new PowerPoint slides much quicker than they get new hymn books. So the speed at which we can adopt new excellent music to our repertoires is greatly increased by projecting.
Uh, Good. One detail. I know this was not an answer to the question, but 728B, it looks like that's the end of the book. So the question is like, why not 729? But then in the back
Oh,
cover,
there,
there's a 729 and a 730. Were those
yes.
always there? And that's
Um,
why it's B? Why not 731? What's
okay,
going
so yeah, so I believe 729 and 730 were added in the 1972 printing. So those pages, I believe, are blank in the first printing in 1971. Then in 72, 729 and 730 were added to the back cover pages. And in 73, we added Our God, He is Alive at 728B because we already had a 729 and 730.
Yeah. 731 though is just like the limit. You know, you see those trucks that say we don't go faster, like there's a speed regulator, no faster
Well,
than 70.
but the end pages were already numbered as 729 and 730.
Yeah.
Right? And he had to slip, he had no place in his current manufacturing process to add any pages.
Ah,
So he had to take something out, and he took out the the coda special chorus to
ah,
728 and slid Our God He is Alive right there before the index.
very good.
This is going to be our biggest podcast. I mean, every Church of Christ member is going to be satisfied finally about the Church of Christ fight song.
That's classic. Yes. Okay. So one advantage is that new good material can make its way into churches much more efficiently, much faster. Good. What other benefits do you see with
People are
projecting?
people are singing looking forward instead of looking down. So you get more volume from their voices. They're apparently breathing better. So it in that respect should improve the quality of the singing a bit.
Okay. And
I
that's
think
because they're not holding their books right, which is like this, so that the sound bounces off. You're looking down and at the song leader. We never instructed about that. So you're right. You're looking down or at your lap. Good.
Yes.
That makes sense. Yep. Uh,
I
what else?
hear from church members that they can see it better. But people who struggle with vision, if our sanctuary is a little dark, and so it's big print and that sort of thing. So it's been helpful that way.
It helps most people with vision problems, but if their problem is more distance related than reading, um,
Right. Yeah.
you always got a couple of folks whose vision problems make it easier for them to read out of the book. And even in my own congregation, I will sometimes there's a guy who I will sometimes slip him something that's not in the book. I'll slip him a paper copy of it because his distance vision, he doesn't drive, his distance vision, not good. Reading vision, very good.
Hmm.
Hmm.
Interesting.
So at your congregation, is there you guys project the songs
We do.
all the time? Okay.
We do.
All right. Any other benefits we can put down for um, projection? All right. Let's start the
There's a couple
con.
of there's a
Oh, go ahead.
couple of a couple of things that you wouldn't expect, unintended consequences of projecting. One of them is that the eyes are more on the screen and less on the leader. When we had books, people would kind of bob up and down looking at the leader and looking at their book. There's something about screens that magnets, it just serves as like a magnet to the eyeball. And we in my congregation project on Sunday morning and Sunday evening, but not on Wednesday evening.
Hmm.
I had a lot more eyes on me on Wednesday night than I have on Sunday morning.
Hmm.
And one of the trends I've noticed when I visit churches in the Bible Belt, big churches, is that a lot of our younger song leaders do not direct. Now, song leading instruction before projection was always that we should lead as much as possible by direction and voice lead as little as possible. It was kind of like the received wisdom. And if you're leading singing, say at um, Freed Hardeman Bible lectures, when you have 3,000 people there, you don't want to voice lead at all. You entirely lead by direction. Well, if no one's looking at you,
Hmm.
you're not leading, leading by direction is not going to work. So when I'm visiting congregations, big congregations in the Bible Belt now, I'm noticing some of these young guys, they're all mic'd up. Um, it's a very amplified kind of sound, and they don't direct at all, or they direct very little. Just occasionally will give some kind of hand direction. Just contrary to the way that um, we train song leaders for decades. If you were around in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, you might remember a guy named Ralph Casey who went around doing singing workshops at churches, taught taught our leaders how to direct using standard direction motion that you'd use to direct a choral group or an orchestra. Put a lot of emphasis on that. Now, nobody's looking at you. Everyone's eyeballs are magnetized to the screen.
Hmm.
So it's gonna change kind of the style of our singing. It's going to be more voice led, amplified, um, and that's just a little bit of a cultural shift.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So that's a good way to frame maybe the cons are also maybe not necessarily always negative, but other like the category of unintended consequences that aren't necessarily great. Uh, so good. A couple of things there. What else?
And then the our congregations are more differentiated by what they sing. As we mentioned earlier, in the 70s, 80s, and into the early 1990s, we had one hymn book that was dominant. Had When you count all the A's and B's, it had 741 hymns. And close to three-quarters of our churches were using that one hymn book. There were a few holdouts that were using Great Songs, number two revised, that had been the main book preceding that. And then in 1974, Jack Boyd, Forrest McCann, and ACU Press added 70 hymns to that collection. It was more classically oriented, and there were a small number of churches using that, and Sacred Selections had a small number of churches. But we were basically, no matter whether you were uh, theologically conservative or more progressive, or you were urban or rural or black or white, you had the same hymn book. You had 741 choices. It sounds like a lot of choices, but it's nothing compared to what you have electronically.
Hmm.
Even the paperless hymnal, I think, is up to 1,600 songs. It's more than twice just from that single source. And a lot of congregations that project are using multiple sources. Apparently, a lot of congregations have that are using Praise for the Lord have the Praise for the Lord electronic edition, and they have paperless hymnal, and they may have R.J. Taylor's E-Praise collection,
Hmm.
and then they buy songs from Keith Lancaster's a cappella company, and they buy some songs from Fearless for You or Zoe or any other groups that produce a smaller set of songs. So they have a whole bunch of different sources. Some of them require CCLI licensing, and some of them don't. And the number of choices that a church faces could be well over 2,000.
So what does that do to a church's, yeah, unity and just like when it comes to song selection and all of that?
So I think it says that our congregations have less of a common repertoire of hymns now than they had 30 years ago. 30 years ago, it was so limited, and there was really a core even within that 741. There was a core smaller than that maybe comprised 80% of what was being sung, and then everyone had their own little 20%, according to their region, their demographics. I grew up in New Jersey, right? And a lot of members of churches in New Jersey were converted out of the Episcopal Anglican Church, right? We sang a lot of high church stuff. And so the repertoire would be tweaked at the margins. Maybe the last 20% of it was idiosyncratic to the particular church's region, demographics, theological bent, so forth. But what I'm seeing now is there's a lot of difference
Hmm.
when you go from one church to another. Even if you compare two churches that emphasize contemporary music, they may not be singing the same contemporary music.
Right.
And what is well known in one of those congregations may be unknown in the next. In other words, the goodness of God may be sung once a month at one congregation, and the congregation 20 miles away, it's singing a lot of contemporary music, may not have ever introduced that song, but they're singing Hymn of Heaven and Living Hope, and they have their own set of contemporary music.
Hmm.
So when you move from one congregation to another, what you're hearing is a whole lot different.
That's
Good.
fascinating. It's like with the explosion in Bible translations, you kind of lose a common language, where everyone spoke King James when that was all there was.
Right,
Yeah.
right. And then the revised standard came in, and a lot of us were using that.
Hmm.
Um, and then there's been like an avalanche. So the scripture reading could be taken from 6 or 8 different translations.
And we don't know what to memorize now,
Yeah,
Right,
that's right.
right.
if we're still doing that, right?
Right. So because there's such variety and differentiation of the repertoire of congregations, we may not we may kind of lose the core, and people won't have anything memorized beyond maybe just a handful.
Yeah,
In other
that's
words, we
sad.
might have had a common repertoire of 200 hymns that were in heavy usage across our brotherhood. That might be down to 20.
Hmm.
That's a drastic change.
Other, very good. Other
With the
unintended.
coming
Yes.
in of these like contemporary songs, or there's a lot of pressure, I think, on worship leaders to really incorporate contemporary songs. A lot of concern for the youth and that sort of thing. Do you see them uh, pushing out the old hymns? I mean, I'm thinking about, God is the fountain whence as sort of the standard opening song in most churches that, when I was growing up, you'd find God is the fountain whence all the time. Um, those kinds of songs. I'm just wondering if those sort of classical hymns are even in people's repertoire anymore, if they're just gone.
So maybe I'm a little less enthusiastic about contemporary songs than the average worship leader in Churches of Christ. Um, uh, I we have some Keith Lancaster stuff that we sing, right? But on the other hand, I'm not thrown away when I survey the wondrous cross or God is the fountain whence or the like. Interesting thing, before the pandemic, I asked our teenage class, small church, so it's a small sample size of 6. Um, what do you consider to be the best hymns? What's really, what in your judgment, your personal taste, what are the best hymns? On 5 of the 6 responses, when I survey the wondrous cross was listed first.
Wow.
Okay, the only the kind of songs that were listed frequently were, and I asked them not to collude. The ones that were listed frequently were Hallelujah, Praise Jehovah, Oh, Worship the King, um, All Hail the Power of Jesus' Name.
Hmm.
A lot of stuff that the contemporary songs that made their list were We Will Glorify the King of Kings, I Stand Amazed, I, oh, I stand in awe, sorry. Um, there were a couple of, I'm trying to think of a couple of others. Oh, in Christ alone, how deep the Father's love for us. I thought our teenagers did a super excellent job.
Yeah,
Now,
that's amazing.
maybe there was a little skewing of the result because they had a hint that what the person making the inquiry would have liked to hear, right? So there might have been some bias introduced by that, but I still thought that this is a pretty balanced list.
It
That's
is,
great.
yeah. I think that's good. It assumes they've been in a church too that does still sing those songs. They've been introduced to them and they
Hmm.
haven't been replaced. In a lot of churches, those songs have been replaced. I've been to and worshiped multiple times at multiple churches where there is an understanding, and sometimes it is a spoken understanding that we will do either zero or maybe one or two traditional songs, the kind you would see in a hymnal from 30 years ago. And the rest aren't that. So maybe the ones you mentioned, maybe three or four kind of make it into that core, and otherwise are out. Uh, Good. I think I would put along with that just the fact everything that screens do. So I think what you say about the screens as magnet is just a really good observation, a really good way to put the change that happens when you put screens in front of humans, anybody in any circumstance. So, one thing it does is make those, I mean, you see words on a screen and they're gone because most you can get up there is maybe two bars or something, with a four-part harmony. So you see a couple of phrases and it's gone, a couple of phrases and it's gone, and you lose sort of a visual structure for how the song goes together, how the verses in a well-written poem parallel one another. And there's very little, especially in songs that are made for, written for a rock band, there's very little sort of understanding of the structure of the song. And a screen is fleeting, the words are, like I say, they're there and gone, and so they don't stick with you. I mean, there's a lot of data and research on how reading something, that you hold in your hand is better for retention and comprehension than reading it on a screen for many reasons. But I
That's
think of the
that's
people,
that, that's
go
a
ahead.
fantastic point, and I got an interesting illustration I'm just thinking about now as you make this point. Um, for a number of years now, I've been involved in leading a new hymn workshop at the Freed Hardeman Bible Lectures every year. And we put the song on the screen. People say, I'm fine to sing on the screen, but when I'm learning a song, can you put it on paper for me?
Okay.
We
Yeah,
want
that's
to we want
interesting.
to see it. We want to see how the whole thing fits together. It helps
Yeah.
us learn the song.
Yeah.
So when I'm now introducing a new song in my home congregation, I give them the paper first.
Yeah.
And I get positive feedback from that. Never, and it's for the reasons, for some of the reasons that you have identified. You get to see the whole thing. You see where the song is going, not just musically, but when it's a new song, you want to know where it's going
Hmm.
with its content. What is the theology of this song? And if I don't get to see it all together, I don't get to read the poetry, I don't fully appreciate that. So there's real value in when you're introducing a new song to hand it out um, on paper.
Yeah. No, that's
Excellent.
interesting that it's been confirmed in the way you're talking about at the lectureship. Um, so and back to Todd's point a little bit, along with the screens, I think that sticks with you less, especially if we have a repertoire of 1600 to 2000 plus songs. But I just think of all the people I've known who have had suffered with Alzheimer's or dementia. It's the songs that they can still remember, and they can't remember your name, but you start singing. God is the fountain winds, or When I Survey the Wondrous Cross, and they know every word of it. And I know from speaking for myself, I know from songs of the church not only the numbers, but like where on the page, the songs
Yeah.
are. And some have better ability with that than others, but we all have that to some extent, that sort of memory that goes with it, and that helps you understand and know and comprehend and retain the songs. So I think that's another huge unintended consequence of screens.
I also think, Keith, that um, just in continuing with that thought, there's something about it that's ephemeral. Um,
Yeah.
humans create artifacts. That's what we leave behind. And I was thinking a few years ago, so we joined the congregation that we're with now in 1998, and they decided to get new hymn books just after we'd gotten there. And so you could donate, buy a hymn book, and you could put a memorial plaque at the front of for somebody. So almost all of our hymnals have, in memory of so and so. Many, many, many of whom I know. But you usually don't recognize that kind of thing. But I had just for some reason on a Sunday morning pulled out a hymn book and just opened to that front page, and I saw in memory of a former member, at whose bedside friends and I sang while he passed. And it was just, it was one of those moments where you realize this is an artifact. He may have, in fact, held this songbook because the plate went in after he passed, which was a few years later. Um, and then I started thinking about who all has held this songbook. And then you start thinking about these hymns, and you think who all has sung these hymns. Some of them, "Be Thou My Vision." How many Christians through the years. So I think that just having something to hold brings in, I think, inherently Christian thoughts about history and sort of the continuance of the church in history. Whereas when it is on the screen, it's just this kind of, it's there and it's got, I'm not, I think, so I think both are good. I think we ought to have hymnals. Not just mention when I'm preaching, I tell my church, if it's a particularly bad sermon, you can always pull out the hymn book and read some of the hymns. So
They've gotten really used to that, haven't they?
they have, yeah. So my people know the hymns really well.
Well, maybe you could dedicate certain songs and put on the slide, dedicated to
Yeah.
in memory of
This
sponsor
week's
this
PowerPoint
song.
presentation is sponsored by.
Yes. Um, Let me also just add that the what we called a pro, in fact, it was the first one mentioned, and I totally agree that the new material, the new good songs that go out get into churches faster, and so you contrasted. I thought that was great. I stand in awe and in Christ alone. Both, I agree, great songs, and had particularly the latter spread faster through churches. Um, Also, with that, you get the bad new material that spreads very quickly, and so for every in Christ alone, there is a I'm not going to give an example of
Go ahead, Keith. You have something
no,
in
no,
your
no,
mind.
no, no,
Don't
no.
push him, he will.
There are too many to choose from um, that don't have the staying power. I mean, my wife and I have do talk about this a lot, but just recently we said it again. What about she was teaching some songs to the kids at school? She teaches a Christian school. It's like, what about that other song? We used to sing at this church that did a lot of contemporary songs. Hadn't heard that in 15 years because nobody wants to sing that song anymore. But boy, we sang it, every other week back in the day, and we knew it was bad then. But it's like time tells you, that it was. So that's just another maybe unintended consequence there. I'll just add to a story of something that happened to me recently that kind of goes along with this. I was speaking at a conference that had about 40 or 50 ministers, And I was speaking, they asked me to speak on technology. So I was talking about sort of the evaluation and use of technology in general, but particularly in churches. And toward the end, I just said something like, what if we could make the worship assembly of the church, the Eucharistic assembly of the church, a screen-free zone, you know? So this is like, I'm not saying and it was at the end of a long talk about how there's a continuum here of use of technology. I'm not naming anything on the spectrum sinful, but it's just what if we could have an hour, Americans could have an hour a week where you didn't have screens to look at. And there was a little bit of Q&A about that. And I just said, I know it would be challenging to most churches who've spent money to get a projector and get the slides and everything. So I get that they're not, if they have that, they're not going to throw them away, but just like don't add more to what we're already doing with screens, you know, QR code, don't encourage people to take out their phones during worship, which is kind of my plea, it's advice. You can take it or leave it. Well, a man I respect very much, old enough to be my father, said to me after that, your position, what you had to say about screens, I thought he was going to say, I really appreciate that. No, he said, is really extreme. That's really extreme. And I just thought, I mean, I didn't counter it too much. I just kind of nodded mostly and listened to it. And then we go after that to the morning devotional, which is, these 40 or 50 people sitting in a room with great acoustics just before breakfast. And probably most of that, 15 or 20 minutes of it, we're just singing songs. There's a leader, but there are no books, there are no slides. We're just singing. And it's a wonderful worship experience. And we finish that and we get in line for breakfast. And I just said, would it have changed the environment and would it have changed the mood and the setting in any way if we had had all of those songs projected up on a wall? And as we sit around tables and sing these. And he said, without hesitation, yes, it would. And I just said, that's all I'm saying. It would have changed it. I'm not even asking how it changes it, but it changes it. Our eyes, like you said, would have been magnetized to the wall instead of looking around at one another or being able to close our eyes and meditate while we're singing. Because even if we're singing a song we know, I need to look and make sure that they're not introducing a verse or doing something that, my eyes will go to that. And I wouldn't even suggest putting hymn books in front of us when we're doing that. I mean, that's a technology too that we don't need at that point.
Mm.
So that's all I'm saying is it changes things. And then to call extreme something that up to 25 years ago no one in Christian history had ever used before. Like this is the position of 2000, nearly 2000 years of Christian singing. We've been able to get by without projecting songs. That's not extreme to say maybe we could do that, but anyway, the technology and how quickly it has overtaken churches without considering some of these unintended consequences and the cons there, I think, is a little bit concerning to me. Not only
Yeah.
with that, but with other technologies that we just get on board with without thinking through first.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
This is not as deep as that, Keith, but just another real brief consequence. But it gives worship leaders, or song leaders particularly, a lot less flexibility. I think about like when I was growing up, you'd have an invitation. If you had somebody come forward to get baptized, the song leader could pull out the hymn book and we're going to sing all 8 verses of, whatever it is that we're doing. Well, you got to have somebody who can add those to the PowerPoint presentation real quick, and I'm in a small church. We don't we're barely able to do PowerPoint anyway. Don't ask me to start throwing stuff in there. And I think that, yes, I think it does make it more complicated to be more flexible. Um, if you need to shorten a song or two, you just skip through it real quick or something, I guess. But
Hmm.
either you have a team there that's able to make the PowerPoint flexible, or you're kind of stuck with what you got, as it seems to me. And I think that can be a bit of a problem.
Hmm. Good. Other thoughts, John?
It is, Todd's point is very good. It is true that there's less spontaneity in worship because you're wedded to the PowerPoint deck that's been prepared. So you're right. If you wanted to throw in a hymn that you hadn't prepared to sing because of something that happened in the service, you're not sure. Well, can I really do that? Do I have enough hymn books in the rack to do that? And if the preacher goes into overtime and you want to cut a few verses out of some of the songs, so your people who are working as a nurse in the hospital can get to work. You can't do that either because you can't. It's the person operating the PowerPoint is it's not so easy to jump to find where we're going to just sing the first and last stanza. How are you going to do that? That's not easily done. So yeah, you're it's funny that in the 80s and 90s everyone wanted to be hip and spontaneous, and now that the technologies come in, spontaneity's out.
That's right. Yeah, that is ironic.
It is.
The technology has limited us in that way. Well, I noticed we're getting close to an hour. I also noticed that we didn't get to two of the three big questions I had for us to discuss today. So I don't know if we're just going to have to return to that at another time, but I think we will have to.
Yeah.
So, unless there's something else here, anything left unsaid that you wanted to say about this, either one of you? Last opportunity. All right. Very good. Well, thank you so much, John Wiegand, for joining us today for this discussion just about singing in churches and some of the technological aspects of it. I will just remind our listeners and viewers here that we did a Journal of Christian Studies issue on singing in churches. So that was a couple of years ago, and you can find in our back issues. Those of you who subscribe to the journal should be having digital access to all of those as well. And then we also have a podcast that we did about a year ago with Max Sandlin, where we spoke of the best songs, best hymns to sing in churches. And I think we came up with a list of the 9 best hymns. So go back and listen to that podcast as well. So thank you all for listening today to Theological Table Talk. Please follow or subscribe to Theological Table Talk on Spotify or Apple. And these episodes are available also on the CCS YouTube channel. So give the podcast a like and a 5-star review if you are inclined. And share a comment or a question with us to discuss. So suggested topics, something to discuss, or guests that you would like to see, email us at info@christian-studies.org, and check out the Center for Christian Studies at christian-studies.org. And if you like what you see on the website, like what you've heard today, hit that give